Billionaire's daughter falls for a janitor. Her father's reaction will shock you. The grand ballroom glistened with the kind of opulence that only old money could command. Chandeliers, draped with crystals, cast a warm glow over the polished marble floor. Charles Whitman stood at the center of it all, his tailored suit fitting him like a second skin as he addressed the crowd. His voice carried a practiced confidence, each word dripping with the authority of a self-made billionaire. "Ladies and gentlemen," Charles began, his smile as polished as the silverware adorning the banquet tables. "Tonight, we celebrate not just our successes, but our legacy. The Whitman family has always believed in hard work, determination, and an unwavering commitment to excellence." The room erupted in polite applause, and Charles raised his glass in a toast. His daughter, Amelia, stood nearby, her smile fixed but her eyes distant. She had heard this speech a dozen times before, each iteration more hollow than the last. As the applause died down, she excused herself from a conversation she wasn't truly a part of and slipped toward the balcony. The cool evening air was a welcome reprieve from the suffocating grandeur inside. Amelia leaned against the railing, looking out at the city skyline. She didn't resent her father's success. It had provided her with a life of privilege and opportunity, but there was a part of her that longed for something more, something real. The endless galas, the carefully curated image, it all felt so performative. Her thoughts were interrupted by the faint sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see Ethan, the janitor from her father's company. He was dressed in his work uniform, carrying a tray of empty glasses he had collected from the tables. His presence was a stark contrast to the elegance around them, but Amelia found it oddly comforting. "I didn't expect to see you out here," Ethan said, his tone respectful but not deferential. Amelia smiled faintly. "I needed some fresh air." Ethan nodded, setting the tray down on a nearby table. He hesitated for a moment before speaking again. "It's a beautiful view." "It is," Amelia agreed, her gaze returning to the city lights. "Sometimes I forget to appreciate it." Ethan leaned against the railing, careful to keep a polite distance. "I guess it's easy to overlook things when you're used to them." Amelia glanced at him, curious. "What about you? Do you ever get used to all this?" She gestured toward the lavish party inside. Ethan chuckled softly. "Not really, but I've learned to navigate it. You'd be surprised how much you can observe when people don't notice you." Amelia tilted her head, intrigued. "What do you mean?" Ethan shrugged. "People show their true selves when they think no one's watching. It's like a window into who they really are." Amelia considered his words, a new respect forming in her mind. "That's an interesting perspective." Before Ethan could respond, a voice called out from inside. "Amelia, there you are." Charles appeared in the doorway, his expression shifting slightly as he noticed Ethan. "Is everything all right?" "Fine, Dad," Amelia said quickly. "I was just getting some air." Charles nodded, but his gaze lingered on Ethan for a moment longer than necessary. "You should come back inside. People are asking about you." Amelia sighed but complied, giving Ethan a small smile as she followed her father back into the ballroom. Ethan watched her go, his thoughts swirling. She was unlike anyone he had ever met in this world of wealth and power. Genuine, thoughtful, and surprisingly kind. Over the next few weeks, Amelia found herself seeking out moments to talk to Ethan whenever she visited her father's company. It began with casual greetings in the hallway or brief exchanges in the break room. But their conversations soon grew longer and more meaningful. Ethan shared his dreams of becoming an engineer, a goal he had been working toward by taking night classes and studying during his breaks. Amelia was impressed by his determination and encouraged him to keep going. "You're incredibly talented," she told him one afternoon as they sat in the courtyard. "Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Ethan smiled, though there was a hint of doubt in his eyes. "It's not always easy to believe that when you're, well, where I am." Amelia frowned. "Where you are doesn't define who you are. Your potential isn't limited by your circumstances." Her words stayed with Ethan long after their conversation ended. He had always believed in hard work, but hearing someone like Amelia, a woman from a world so far removed from his own. Validate his efforts gave him a renewed sense of purpose. Their growing connection didn't go unnoticed. Some employees whispered about the billionaire's daughter spending time with the janitor, their curiosity and judgment evident in every stolen glance. Amelia ignored them, but Ethan couldn't help feeling self-conscious. One afternoon, as they talked in the employee lounge, Ethan voiced his concerns. "I'm not sure this is appropriate," he said, his tone hesitant. "People are starting to notice." Amelia looked at him, her expression firm. "Let them. I don't care what they think." Ethan hesitated. "But your father might." Amelia sighed, leaning back in her chair. "My father cares too much about what people think. That's his problem, not mine." Ethan didn't argue, but the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. He knew their friendship, or whatever it was becoming, was walking a fine line. Still, he couldn't bring himself to pull away. The moment of reckoning came sooner than either of them expected. One evening, as Amelia and Ethan walked through the company parking lot after hours, they were spotted by one of Charles's business associates. The man's eyes narrowed as he took in the sight of the billionaire's daughter laughing with a janitor. By the next morning, the rumor had reached Charles. He summoned Amelia to his office, his tone clipped and his expression stormy. "What's this I hear about you and the janitor?" he demanded, his voice sharp. Amelia met his gaze, unflinching. "His name is Ethan. And yes, we've been spending time together." Charles's jaw tightened. "Do you have any idea what this looks like? What people are saying?" "I don't care what people are saying," Amelia shot back. "Ethan is a good person. He's smart, kind, and hardworking. That's more than I can say for some of the people in your social circle." Charles's eyes narrowed. "This isn't about kindness, Amelia. This is about reputation. Our reputation." Amelia's voice rose, her frustration spilling over. "Maybe you should worry less about what people think and more about what's right. Ethan deserves more respect than you're giving him." Charles stared at her, his anger barely contained. "This ends now," he said firmly. "You will not see him again. Do you understand?" Amelia's heart pounded, but she refused to back down. "You don't control my life, Dad. Not anymore." Charles Whitman was not a man accustomed to being challenged, especially not by his own daughter. Amelia's defiance lingered in his mind long after she stormed out of his office, her words echoing in the silence. "You don't control my life." He stood by the window, staring out at the city skyline that symbolized his empire. Control was what had built his fortune, what had kept his life orderly and predictable. And now it felt like that control was slipping through his fingers. Meanwhile, Amelia found herself pacing the length of her apartment, her emotions a tangled mess of frustration and resolve. She hated the way her father dismissed Ethan, as if his worth could be measured solely by his job title. Ethan was so much more than her father could see, a man of intelligence, integrity, and quiet strength. As the days passed, Amelia and Ethan continued to see each other, though more cautiously. They avoided public places and kept their meetings brief, always aware of the shadow her father's disapproval cast over them. Ethan tried to keep his worries to himself, but one evening, as they sat together on a park bench, he couldn't hold back. "Amelia," he began, his voice hesitant, "maybe your father's right." She looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "This is causing problems for you, for your family. Maybe it's not worth it." Amelia reached for his hand, her grip firm. "Ethan, don't say that. You're worth it. This isn't about my family or what people think. It's about us. What we have is real, and I won't let anyone take that away." Ethan met her gaze, his doubts still lingering but softened by her conviction. "I just don't want you to get hurt." "I can handle my father," Amelia said, her tone resolute. "I've spent my whole life living by his rules. It's time I live by mine." Back at the Whitman estate, Charles was devising a plan of his own. He prided himself on his ability to solve problems, and this, his daughter's entanglement with a janitor, was, in his mind, just another problem to fix. He began digging into Ethan's background, searching for anything he could use to discredit him. What Charles found surprised him. Ethan's record was clean, no scandals, no debts, no skeletons in the closet. Instead, he found a young man who had worked tirelessly to support himself, juggling multiple jobs while pursuing his education. Charles even discovered that Ethan had been awarded scholarships for his academic performance, though financial hardships had forced him to drop out before completing his degree. The more Charles learned, the more unsettled he became. Ethan wasn't the failure he had expected to find. If anything, he was a testament to hard work and perseverance. Qualities Charles had once valued, but had long since buried beneath his obsession with wealth and status. The next confrontation came during a family dinner. Amelia had reluctantly agreed to attend, knowing her father would use the opportunity to press her about Ethan. She wasn't wrong. As soon as they were seated, Charles leaned forward, his gaze fixed on her. "Amelia, we need to talk about this situation." She set down her fork, bracing herself. "There's nothing to talk about. I've made my decision." Charles's jaw tightened. "Your decision? You're risking everything we've built for." "What? A relationship that has no future." Amelia's voice was steady but sharp. "You don't get to decide what my future looks like. That's my choice." "And what about his future?" Charles shot back. "Do you think he can provide for you? That he can give you the life you're accustomed to?" Amelia's eyes blazed with anger. "Ethan doesn't need to provide for me. I'm more than capable of taking care of myself. And unlike you, he sees me for who I am, not what I represent." Charles sat back, his expression a mixture of frustration and disbelief. "You're making a mistake, Amelia." She stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "The only mistake I made was thinking you might understand." Without another word, she left the table, leaving her father to stew in the aftermath. The argument marked a turning point for Amelia. She realized she couldn't continue living under her father's shadow, constantly trying to reconcile his expectations with her own desires. She made the decision to move out of the Whitman estate, renting a modest apartment where she could carve out a life on her own terms. Ethan supported her every step of the way, though he worried about the strain it was putting on her relationship with her father. "Are you sure about this?" he asked one evening as they unpacked boxes in her new apartment. Amelia nodded, her determination unwavering. "I need to do this, Ethan. For myself. For us." Her words reassured him, but the weight of their situation still lingered. He knew that being with Amelia came with challenges he had never anticipated, but he also knew he couldn't walk away. She was worth every sacrifice. As weeks turned into months, Ethan focused on pursuing his dreams. With Amelia's encouragement, he applied for an apprenticeship at a renowned engineering firm. To his surprise, he was accepted, his talent and work ethic earning him a spot in the competitive program. Amelia, too, found a sense of purpose. She began volunteering at community centers, using her privilege and connections to support underprivileged youth. Her work brought her a sense of fulfillment she had never felt in the polished halls of her father's company. Their progress didn't go unnoticed. Charles, though still bitter about Amelia's choices, couldn't ignore the changes he saw in her. She was happier, more confident, and more independent than ever before. And Ethan, despite his initial skepticism, was proving himself to be far more than Charles had given him credit for. Charles Whitman wasn't a man who easily admitted defeat. Yet, as he watched his daughter thrive outside the walls of his carefully curated world, he couldn't help but question the rigidity of his beliefs. The independent, self-assured woman Amelia had become stood in stark contrast to the image he had of her as someone needing his protection and guidance. Late one evening, he sat in his study, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring at a photograph of Amelia as a child. It was from a family trip to the countryside, long before the pressures of maintaining the Whitman legacy had consumed him. Her laugh, frozen in time, reminded him of a joy he hadn't seen in years. The soft knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Helen, his longtime assistant, holding a folder. "I thought you might want to see this," she said, placing it on his desk. Charles opened it, finding Ethan's file inside. Helen had updated it with details of his apprenticeship, his engineering projects, and even a glowing recommendation from his mentor at the firm. "He's impressive," Helen said gently, "and he clearly cares about Amelia." Charles didn't respond immediately, his gaze fixed on the papers. "He's still not what I envisioned for her." Helen hesitated. "With all due respect, Mr. Whitman, maybe it's not about what you envisioned. Maybe it's about what makes her happy." Her words lingered long after she left the room. Meanwhile, Ethan's apprenticeship was transforming his life. The work was challenging, but he excelled, driven by the belief that he was building something meaningful. Not just for himself, but for the future he envisioned with Amelia. His supervisors were impressed by his dedication and creativity, and he quickly earned the respect of his peers. One evening, as he and Amelia sat together in her apartment, he showed her a prototype he had been working on. A compact, affordable solar panel designed for low-income communities. "This is incredible, Ethan," Amelia said, her eyes lighting up as she examined the design. "Do you realize how much this could help people?" Ethan shrugged, a modest smile on his face. "It's just an idea for now. But if I can get the funding, I think it could make a difference." Amelia's mind raced with possibilities. She had seen firsthand how her father's wealth could be used for good when applied thoughtfully. Perhaps this was an opportunity to bridge the gap between the two worlds she straddled. "You'll get the funding," she said firmly. "I'll make sure of it." The following week, Amelia approached Charles with an unexpected proposition. She found him in the garden, tending to the roses, a rare moment of quiet for the man who rarely slowed down. "Dad," she began, her voice steady, "I have an idea I want to pitch to you." Charles raised an eyebrow, curious. "Go on." She explained Ethan's project, outlining its potential impact and the steps needed to bring it to fruition. She spoke with a conviction that reminded Charles of himself in his younger years, back when he still believed in taking risks for the right reasons. "I know you think Ethan isn't good enough for me," Amelia said, meeting his gaze, "but this isn't about us. This is about creating something meaningful, something that could change lives. And I think you could help." Charles considered her words, torn between his lingering skepticism and the undeniable passion in her voice. Finally, he nodded. "Set up a meeting. I want to hear more." When the day of the meeting arrived, Ethan was nervous but determined. He dressed in his best suit, modest compared to the tailored attire Charles was accustomed to, but clean and professional. As he entered the Whitman Estates conference room, he was struck by the grandeur of the space, but he refused to let it intimidate him. Charles greeted him with a firm handshake, his expression unreadable. "Let's hear what you've got," he said, gesturing for Ethan to begin. Ethan launched into his presentation, outlining the technical aspects of the solar panels and their potential to provide affordable energy to underserved communities. He spoke with a mix of passion and precision, his confidence growing as he saw Charles listening intently. When he finished, the room was silent for a moment before Charles leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "It's a solid idea," he admitted, "but it's ambitious. Do you have the infrastructure to scale it?" Ethan met his gaze, unwavering. "Not yet, but with the right support, I believe I can make it happen." Charles nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." After Ethan left, Charles found himself pacing his study, replaying the presentation in his mind. Ethan had been composed, intelligent, and undeniably driven. He wasn't the unworthy suitor Charles had imagined. He was something more. That evening, Charles called Amelia. "Your friend," he began, pausing to choose his words carefully, "has potential. I'll fund the project." Amelia's relief was palpable, but she couldn't resist teasing him. "Does this mean you're starting to like him?" Charles chuckled, a rare sound that surprised even him. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves." As Ethan's project moved forward with Charles's backing, the dynamic between the three of them began to shift. Charles started attending project meetings, offering insights from his years of experience. Though he was still cautious, he couldn't deny the respect he was developing for Ethan, not just for his work but for the way he carried himself. For Ethan, the experience was surreal. Working alongside the man who had once dismissed him as unworthy was a challenge, but he approached it with the same determination that had carried him through every obstacle in his life. And for Amelia, Seeing her father and Ethan collaborate, however tentatively, was a glimmer of hope. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. As the months passed, the solar panel project began to take shape. Ethan's designs were refined with input from Charles's team of engineers, and a prototype was successfully tested in a rural community. The results were promising. Families who had struggled with unreliable electricity now had a sustainable source of energy. The success drew media attention, with headlines praising the initiative as a groundbreaking partnership between innovation and philanthropy. For Ethan, it was a surreal experience to see his ideas come to life on such a large scale. But the newfound attention came with its challenges. At one press event, a reporter posed a question that caught him off guard. "Ethan, how does it feel to know that you're working with the father of the woman you're rumored to be dating?" Ethan hesitated, glancing at Charles, who stood nearby. The billionaire's expression was neutral, giving nothing away. "I'm here because I believe in this project," Ethan replied carefully. "Amelia has been incredibly supportive, but this work isn't about us. It's about helping communities that need it." The response was measured and professional, but the question lingered in the air, fueling speculation. That evening, Amelia found Ethan pacing her apartment, visibly tense. "Ethan, what's wrong?" she asked, setting her bag down. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The media is starting to dig into us. I don't want this to overshadow the work we're doing." Amelia stepped closer, her expression resolute. "Let them talk. We're not doing anything wrong. It's not just about us," Ethan said, his voice edged with frustration. "Your father's involved in this project. I don't want to give him another reason to doubt me." Amelia reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Ethan, my father's opinion doesn't define us. What we're doing matters, and you've already proven yourself to him, whether he admits it or not." Ethan met her gaze, his resolve softening. "I just don't want to jeopardize everything we've worked for." "You won't," Amelia said firmly. "We're in this together." Meanwhile, Charles found himself grappling with his own inner conflict. On one hand, he couldn't deny the success of Ethan's project or the passion he saw in both Ethan and Amelia. On the other hand, he still struggled to let go of the image he had of his daughter's ideal future. A future that didn't include a janitor-turned-engineer. One evening, he sought advice from an old friend, Marcus, a retired business partner known for his candid wisdom. "Charles," Marcus said over a glass of scotch, "you've spent your entire life building an empire. But empires crumble when the people running them lose sight of what really matters." Charles frowned. "And what do you think I've lost sight of?" "Your daughter," Marcus said simply. "She's not a business deal to negotiate or a legacy to manage. She's her own person, and if you can't see that, you're going to lose her." The words struck a chord, forcing Charles to confront the possibility that his desire to control Amelia's life was driving her away. The next time Charles met with Ethan, the conversation took an unexpected turn. They were reviewing the latest project updates when Charles set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. "Ethan," he began, his tone measured, "I owe you an apology." Ethan blinked, caught off guard. "An apology?" Charles nodded. "I misjudged you. When Amelia first told me about you, I assumed the worst. I let my own biases cloud my judgment. But you've proven me wrong." Ethan's surprise gave way to a cautious gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Whitman. That means a lot." Charles studied him for a moment before continuing. "You're a good man, Ethan, and I can see why Amelia cares about you. But you need to understand something. Being with her means more than just loving her. It means standing up to the pressures that come with our name, our legacy. Can you handle that?" Ethan met his gaze, his voice steady. "I faced challenges my whole life, Mr. Whitman. I'm not afraid of hard work or scrutiny. All I care about is being there for Amelia and building a future we can both be proud of." Charles nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Then you have my support." For Amelia, the shift in her father's attitude was a relief, but she remained cautious. She knew Charles's approval was hard-won and could easily be lost if things didn't go perfectly. Still, for the first time, she felt hopeful about a future where the three of them could coexist peacefully. The true test came when the solar panel project was officially launched at a large-scale event. Leaders from across industries and communities gathered to celebrate the milestone, with Charles, Amelia, and Ethan standing together on stage. As Ethan spoke about the journey that had brought them to this moment, his voice was filled with gratitude and determination. This project isn't just about innovation. It's about hope. It's about proving that no matter where you come from, you can make a difference if you're willing to fight for it. The audience erupted into applause, and Amelia beamed with pride. For Charles, the moment was bittersweet. He had spent years building a legacy defined by wealth and power, but here was Ethan, building something far more meaningful. It was a humbling realization. The ride back to the city was quiet, punctuated only by the soft hum of the car engine. Charles sat in the back seat beside Amelia, his thoughts racing. The day's events had left a deep impression on him. Watching Ethan among the community members, inspiring trust and gratitude, had been an eye-opener. It wasn't just his work ethic or determination. It was the genuine respect Ethan commanded from those who mattered most, the people who benefited from his vision. Amelia glanced at her father, noticing his uncharacteristically contemplative expression. "You're quiet," she said softly. Charles looked at her, a faint smile on his lips. "Just thinking about how wrong I've been." Amelia's brow furrowed. "Wrong about what?" "About a lot of things," Charles admitted. "About Ethan, about you, about what really matters." Seeing him today, hearing those families talk about the impact of his work, it made me realize how much I've let my own ego get in the way. Amelia felt a surge of emotion but kept her tone light. "It's never too late to change, Dad." Charles chuckled softly. "You sound like your mother." Amelia smiled, the mention of her late mother bringing a sense of warmth. "She always did believe in second chances." Charles nodded, the weight of the memory grounding him. "I just hope I'm not too late for mine." The next few weeks were transformative for all three of them. Charles threw his full support behind the solar panel initiative, using his influence to secure additional funding and partnerships. It was a new experience for Ethan, working so closely with the man who had once dismissed him, but he found Charles's insights invaluable. Their collaboration, while occasionally tense, became a cornerstone of the project's growing success. For Amelia, watching her father and Ethan work together was both surreal and gratifying. The man she loved and the man she had spent her life trying to understand were finally finding common ground, and it felt like a victory on multiple fronts. One afternoon, as the three of them reviewed plans for the next phase of the initiative, Charles leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Ethan, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." Ethan looked up from the schematics, his expression curious. "What's that?" Charles's tone was measured but direct. "Where do you see this project going in the next 5 years? What's your ultimate goal?" Ethan took a moment to gather his thoughts before responding. "I want it to expand beyond just solar panels. There are so many underserved communities that need sustainable solutions, not just for energy, but for water, education, and infrastructure. I see this as the start of something much bigger." Charles studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Ambitious, but I like it." Amelia couldn't help but smile. It was the first time she had seen her father genuinely acknowledge Ethan's vision without hesitation. Despite the progress they were making, not everyone in Charles's world was pleased with the direction things were taking. Some of his longtime business associates viewed the solar panel initiative as a distraction, a departure from the aggressive profit-driven strategies that had built the Whitman empire. During a board meeting, one of the senior executives, Gerald, voiced his concerns. "Charles, this project is commendable, but it's taking resources away from our core operations. Investors are starting to ask questions." Charles's gaze was steady as he responded. "Let them ask. If they're paying attention, they'll see that this isn't a distraction, it's an evolution. Our company has the means to make a difference, and I intend to use them." Gerald frowned but said nothing further, his dissent silenced by the resolute tone of his boss. Ethan, who had been invited to present at the meeting, felt a surge of respect for Charles. It was one thing to tolerate change. It was another to defend it. That evening, As Amelia and Ethan shared a quiet dinner at her apartment, she brought up the board meeting. "Dad really stood up for the project today," she said, her tone thoughtful. "I didn't think he had it in him." Ethan smiled, his admiration for Charles evident. "He's changed a lot. I think he's starting to see the bigger picture." Amelia nodded, though a hint of skepticism lingered. "I just hope it lasts." "It will," Ethan said firmly, "because it's not just about him anymore. It's about all of us, and what we're building together." As the solar panel project expanded into new regions, the bond between Charles, Ethan, and Amelia grew stronger. Communities across the country began to benefit from affordable energy, and the initiative became a symbol of hope and progress. For Charles, the experience was transformative. He found himself spending more time on the ground, visiting the communities the project was helping, and seeing firsthand the impact it was having. On one such visit, Charles and Ethan toured a rural school where the solar panels had been installed. The principal, an older woman with kind eyes, greeted them warmly and led them to the classrooms. Children waved enthusiastically as Charles and Ethan entered, their laughter filling the air. "This is what it's all about," the principal said, her voice thick with emotion. "Before this, we had to rely on expensive generators that barely worked. Now, our students can study at night, and our teachers have the resources they need." Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with pride. "That's exactly why we started this project." Charles, standing beside him, felt a sense of humility he hadn't experienced in years. The wealth he had amassed over his lifetime had never brought him this kind of fulfillment. For the first time, he realized that true success wasn't about accumulating power or prestige. It was about making a difference. Back at the Whitman estate, Charles began to reflect on his legacy. The conversations he'd had with Ethan, the communities he'd visited, and the progress they'd made had reshaped his understanding of what he wanted to leave behind. He called Amelia into his study one evening, wanting to share his thoughts. "Amelia," he began, gesturing for her to sit. "I've been thinking a lot about the future." She tilted her head, intrigued. "What about it?" Charles leaned forward, his hands clasped. "The Whitman name has always been associated with wealth and power, but I want it to stand for more than that. I want it to mean something, to represent integrity, compassion, and a commitment to helping others." Amelia's eyes softened. "That's a big shift for you." Charles nodded. "It is, but I think it's the right one, and I want you to be a part of it." Her brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "I want you to take on a leadership role in the foundation we're building around the solar panel initiative," Charles said. "You've always had a vision for how to make a difference, and I think you're the perfect person to guide this forward." Amelia hesitated, the weight of his words sinking in. "I don't know, Dad. I've spent so much of my life trying to distance myself from your expectations. This feels different, but it's still tied to you." Charles's voice was steady but sincere. "This isn't about me. It's about us, about what we can do together. And I promise, this time, I'll let you lead." Amelia studied him, searching for any sign of manipulation or ulterior motives. But all she saw was a father trying to make amends. "I'll think about it," she said finally. Meanwhile, Ethan continued to push the project forward, his confidence growing with each milestone they achieved. His work caught the attention of several major organizations, and he was invited to speak at a global energy summit. It was an opportunity he had never imagined, and though the prospect of addressing such a prestigious audience was daunting, he knew it was a chance to amplify their mission. The night before the summit, Ethan and Amelia sat together in her apartment, reviewing his presentation. She could sense his nerves and reached for his hand. "You've got this," she said, her voice firm. "You've worked so hard for this moment. Just speak from the heart." Ethan nodded, her encouragement bolstering his resolve. "I just want to do it justice. For everyone who's believed in me." "You already have," Amelia said, smiling. "Now it's time to show the world what you're capable of." The summit was a resounding success. Ethan's speech, a powerful blend of technical expertise and heartfelt storytelling, earned a standing ovation. He spoke about the importance of sustainable solutions, the impact of the solar panel initiative, and the potential for even greater change when innovation and compassion were combined. Among the audience was Charles, who watched with a sense of pride he couldn't put into words. Ethan wasn't just a partner in the project. He was a testament to the values Charles had rediscovered. And for the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future where Ethan wasn't just a colleague, but a true member of the family. After the summit, Ethan became something of a public figure. His speech went viral, sparking conversations about sustainable energy solutions and the importance of social responsibility in business. Interviews, panel invitations, and partnerships poured in. But through it all, Ethan remained grounded. He often credited Amelia and Charles for their support, ensuring the narrative wasn't just about his success but about the collective effort that made it possible. Back at the Whitman estate, Charles was beginning to navigate a new reality. For years, he had been the face of the Whitman empire, but now he found himself stepping back, allowing others, especially Ethan, to take the spotlight. It wasn't easy, but it felt right. Watching Ethan thrive was a reminder of the values Charles had long overlooked: humility, perseverance, and integrity. One evening, as Charles and Amelia walked through the garden, he turned to her, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Do you think your mother would be proud of all this?" he asked softly. Amelia paused, surprised by the question. "I think she'd be proud of how far we've come," she said. "Of how much you've changed." Charles nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "She always did believe in seeing the best in people. I wish I'd listened to her more." Amelia placed a hand on his arm. "You're listening now. That's what matters." As the solar panel initiative continued to grow, so did the challenges. Expanding into international markets brought logistical hurdles, regulatory barriers, and unexpected costs. Ethan often found himself working late into the night, juggling the demands of the project with the growing expectations placed on him. Amelia noticed the strain it was putting on him and insisted they take a weekend off to recharge. They drove out to a small cabin in the countryside, far from the pressures of the city. It was a chance to reconnect, to remember why they had started this journey in the first place. Sitting by the fire one evening, Ethan turned to Amelia, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I don't think I could have done any of this without you." Amelia smiled, her hand resting on his. "You've always had it in you, Ethan. I just helped you see it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while before Ethan spoke again, his tone more serious. "Do you ever wonder what the future will look like for us?" Amelia tilted her head, considering the question. "I think it'll look a lot like this. Us, supporting each other, building something meaningful." Ethan nodded, his heart swelling with a sense of purpose. "I like the sound of that." Meanwhile, Charles found himself reflecting on his own legacy. The solar panel initiative had become a success beyond his expectations, but it also raised questions about the direction of the Whitman empire. For years, the company had been synonymous with ruthless ambition, but Charles wanted to redefine it. He began working on a plan to transition the company toward more socially responsible practices, using the initiative as a blueprint. When he presented the plan to his board, the reaction was mixed. Some praised the vision, while others expressed concerns about profitability. Gerald, ever the skeptic, was particularly vocal. "This is a gamble, Charles," he said during a heated discussion. "We've built this company on a foundation of hard-nosed business practices. Shifting gears now could alienate our investors." Charles met Gerald's gaze, his tone calm but firm. "And what good is a foundation if it doesn't support the world we're building?" "The world is changing, Gerald. If we don't change with it, we'll be left behind." The room fell silent, and for the first time, Charles saw a glimmer of respect in Gerald's eyes. It wasn't a full endorsement, but it was a start. The following week, Ethan and Amelia attended a gala celebrating the success of the solar panel initiative. It was a glittering affair, filled with industry leaders, philanthropists, and media personalities. As they mingled with the crowd, Ethan couldn't help but feel a sense of pride, not just for himself but for everyone who had supported the project. During the evening, Charles took the stage to deliver a speech. His voice, once tinged with the arrogance of a self-made billionaire, was now steady and sincere. "Tonight, we celebrate more than just a project," he began. We celebrate the power of collaboration, the importance of vision, and the courage to embrace change. This initiative has taught me more than I ever expected. Not just about business, but about family, about resilience, and about the impact we can have when we put our values first. He paused, his gaze shifting to Ethan and Amelia. I want to thank Ethan for his innovation and determination, and Amelia for her unwavering belief in what's possible. You've both shown me that true success isn't about what we build for ourselves, but what we leave behind for others. The room erupted in applause, and as Charles stepped down from the stage, Amelia and Ethan met him halfway. For the first time, they felt like a team, united not just by their shared goals, but by the respect and understanding they had worked so hard to achieve. As the applause from the gala speech subsided, the three of them, Charles, Amelia, and Ethan, stood together near the stage. It was a moment that symbolized how far they had come, both as individuals and as a family. Charles, the once unyielding billionaire, had softened, his perspective transformed by the humility and determination he saw in Ethan. Amelia, no longer bound by her father's expectations, had found her voice and purpose. And Ethan, the underdog who had once felt invisible, now stood at the forefront of a movement that was changing lives. Later that evening, as the gala began to wind down, Charles approached Ethan privately. The older man's demeanor was calm, even warm, a stark contrast to the tension that had defined their earlier encounters. Ethan, Charles began, his tone reflective, I've spent a lot of time thinking about the kind of man I wanted Amelia to end up with. Someone powerful, someone established. But I realize now that I was wrong. Ethan met his gaze, unsure of what to say. What matters isn't power or status, Charles continued. It's character, and you've shown more of that than most people I've ever met. I couldn't be prouder to call you part of this family. The words hit Ethan like a wave. He had fought so hard to prove himself, not just to Charles, but to the world, and hearing this acknowledgement felt like the culmination of that journey. Thank you, Charles, Ethan said quietly. That means more than I can say. Charles placed a hand on his shoulder. Just keep taking care of her. That's all I'll ever ask. The months that followed were filled with milestones. The solar panel initiative continued to expand, reaching communities across the globe. Amelia officially took on a leadership role in the foundation, using her platform to advocate for sustainable solutions and equal opportunities. Her passion and eloquence made her a force to be reckoned with, and she quickly became a respected figure in the philanthropic world. Ethan's work gained international recognition, and he was invited to collaborate with other innovators and organizations. Despite his growing success, he remained grounded, always returning to the values that had driven him from the start: integrity, humility, and a commitment to helping others. For Charles, the transformation was perhaps the most profound. He restructured the Whitman empire, prioritizing ethical practices and community-focused initiatives. The company's profits remained strong, but its reputation as a socially responsible organization became its greatest asset. Charles also found himself reconnecting with Amelia on a deeper level, their relationship finally free from the strain of unspoken expectations. The turning point came on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Amelia and Ethan were at the Whitman estate, enjoying lunch with Charles in the garden. The atmosphere was relaxed, filled with easy conversation and laughter, a far cry from the tension that had once defined their interactions. As they finished their meal, Ethan stood and cleared his throat. Amelia looked up at him, curious. There's something I've been meaning to say, Ethan began, his voice steady but tinged with nervousness. Amelia, meeting you changed my life in ways I never imagined. You've believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, and you've shown me what it means to truly love and be loved. Amelia's eyes widened as Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He knelt before her, his expression earnest and full of hope. Amelia Whitman, will you marry me? The world seemed to stop as Amelia stared at him, her emotions a whirlwind of surprise, joy, and love. Yes, she whispered, her voice breaking. 1,000 times yes. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger as applause erupted from Charles, who had stood to watch the moment unfold. The older man's eyes glistened with pride and emotion as he approached the newly engaged couple. "I couldn't be happier for both of you," Charles said, pulling them into a hug. "You're going to build an incredible life together." The wedding, held months later, was a beautiful celebration of love, unity, and the power of breaking down barriers. The guest list was a mix of family, friends, and community members who had been touched by the solar panel initiative. It was a testament to everything they had built together, not just as a couple, but as a team committed to making the world a better place. As Ethan and Amelia exchanged vows, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. They spoke of their journey, their struggles, and the bond that had carried them through it all. And as they sealed their promises with a kiss, the applause that followed wasn't just for them. It was for the triumph of love, resilience, and the belief that true connection could overcome any obstacle. Ethan, Amelia, and Charles stood together at the edge of the reception, watching as guests laughed and danced under the twinkling lights. It was a moment of peace and fulfillment, a reminder of how far they had come and how much they had achieved. "I think your mother would have loved this," Charles said softly, his voice tinged with emotion. Amelia nodded, her hand resting on her father's arm. "I think she'd be proud of all of us." Charles smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. "You've both shown me what it means to truly live a meaningful life." "Thank you for that." Ethan placed a hand on Charles's shoulder. "We couldn't have done it without you." And as the three of them stood there, united by love, respect, and a shared purpose, it was clear that this was only the beginning of the legacy they were building together.